The first thing that made me realize something was wrong was a receipt for a locksmith.it was sitting on my kitchen counter beneath a grocery flyer, folded once down the middle as if someone had wanted to hide it without actually throwing it away. The receipt was dated 3 days earlier, the address printed at the top was mine, and the service description said, "Rekey front and rear exterior locks, 6 keys." I stood there staring at it for almost a full minute, not because I didn't understand what it meant, because I couldn't figure out why anyone would have needed a locksmith. I had the only keys, or at least, I thought I did. That was the first thing I checked. I opened the little ceramic bowl beside the refrigerator where I kept my spare key. It was still there. I checked the key ring in my bedroom drawer. Still there. Then I checked the back door. The lock worked normally. Nothing had been broken. Nothing had been forced. There was no obvious sign that someone had entered the house, but 6 keys had been made. That number bothered me more than anything else. My parents had keys to the house. My older brother, Daniel, had never had one. My aunt had an emergency key, but she lived 2 hours away and hadn't visited in months. The remaining 2 copies should have been mine. Who needed 6? I turned the receipt over. Nothing. No note. No phone number. Just the locksmith's name, address, and payment method. Cash. That was when I remembered something my mother had said the previous weekend. "Your father and I are going to be around the house a little more." At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. My parents had been staying at my house on and off for nearly a year. It started innocently. My father had needed surgery on his knee, and their house had stairs. My mother suggested they stay with me for a few weeks while he recovered. I agreed. Of course I agreed. It was my parents. The house had 4 bedrooms. I lived alone. There was more than enough room. Those few weeks became 2 months, then 3. Then my mother started referring to my house as the family house. I corrected her once. "It's my house, Mom." She laughed. "I know what you mean." I didn't correct her again. I should have. The house wasn't inherited. It wasn't a childhood home. It wasn't something my parents had helped buy. I had purchased it myself 7 years earlier after saving for years and working 2 jobs while finishing school. Every mortgage payment came from my account. Every property tax bill came to my name. Every insurance document listed me as the owner. The deed had one name on it, mine, but somewhere along the way, my parents had stopped treating that fact as important. And now I was standing in my own kitchen holding a locksmith receipt for 6 keys. If you'd found that receipt in your house, what would you have done? I wish I could say I immediately confronted them. I didn't. I started investigating. The next thing I checked was the security camera. I had a small camera pointed toward the driveway. Nothing sophisticated. It was mainly there because I'd once had packages disappear from my porch. I opened the app. There were gaps. Not many, but enough. The camera had been disconnected twice during the previous week. Both times happened during the afternoon. Both times, my parents had been home. I watched the last recording before the first GAP. My mother walked across the driveway carrying a cardboard box. Then the video froze. The next recording showed my father standing near the garage. I rewound it, played it again. There was something strange about the box. It wasn't one of mine. It had a moving company's logo printed across the side. I searched the company's name. Local movers. I stared at the screen. Then I opened the footage from the second gap. This time, my father was carrying a black plastic storage bin into the house. I recognized that bin.it belonged to Daniel. My older brother. I hadn't seen Daniel in nearly 6 months, and he had never told me he was moving. That was the first real question. Why was my brother's stuff entering my house? The second question came immediately after. Why hadn't anyone told me? I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, sweetheart. Mom, did Daniel come over this week?" A pause. It lasted less than a second, but I noticed it. "Why?" "Just asking. He's your brother. He can come over." "That's not what I asked." Another pause, then she laughed. "You've been watching too many detective shows." I didn't laugh. "Did he move anything into the house?" "Not that I know of." That answer was technically possible. It was also a lie that I knew, because I was looking directly at the black storage bin in the hallway. Daniel's initials were written on the side in white marker. D.R. I asked, "What's in the garage?" My mother's voice changed. "What do you mean?" "There's a moving box in there. Your father has been organizing things." "Daniel's things." Silence then. "You know how your brother is. He's been having a hard time." That was all she said. I ended the call. I didn't confront Daniel. Instead, I walked through the house, Slowly did I open the garage. 3 boxes, then 5, then 8, all labeled with Daniel's name. There was a desk, a lamp. 2 suitcases, a television, a folded mattress leaning against the wall. And tucked behind the lawnmower was a wooden nightstand I had seen in Daniel's bedroom years earlier. He wasn't visiting, he was moving in. But there was something else. On top of one of the boxes was a printed document. I picked it up. It was a storage unit cancellation notice. Daniel had closed his storage unit. The date was 4 days earlier. I sat on the garage floor. That was when the situation stopped being confusing and became deliberate. Daniel had not accidentally left a few boxes at my house. That he had emptied his storage unit. Someone had hired movers. Someone had made 6 keys. And my parents had been helping him. I made a list in my phone. What I know. Daniel's belongings are in my garage. His storage unit is closed. 6 new keys were made at my parents knew about it. My cameras were disconnected twice. What I don't know. Who ordered the locksmith? Who paid for the movers? Why Daniel was moving in? And most importantly, whether my parents believed they had the right to let him. I needed answers. The next thing I checked was the locksmith. The receipt gave me the company name, but not the customer. I called the number. A woman answered. Hi, I have a question about a service call. Sure. I gave her the address. There was a short pause. Yes, we were there. Can you tell me who requested the service? I'm sorry, we don't give customer information. I'm the homeowner. Another pause. I understand. I found the receipt in my house. I didn't authorize the work. Her voice became more careful. Are you saying someone had your locks changed without your permission? Yes. She asked me to verify my name. I did. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. The person who requested it said they were the homeowner's father. My father? I asked. Did he say why the locks needed changing? She hesitated. Security issue. What security issue? I don't know. Did he show identification? Yes. What kind? She couldn't tell me, but she told me the most important thing. The invoice was paid in cash. I thanked her and hung up. My father had told a locksmith he was the homeowner. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a choice. I called him. He answered immediately. What's wrong? Why did you tell a locksmith you own my house? Silence, then a long exhale. I didn't say that. The locksmith said you did. People misunderstand things. 6 keys, Dad. What about them? Who has them? He didn't answer. I asked again. Who has the 6 keys? He finally said, We're family. I stared at the wall. That's not an answer. It should be. No, it shouldn't. His voice hardened. You've become very possessive about that house. It's my house. We helped you. I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. You helped me move a couch. We were there when you bought it. You weren't. We supported you. You visited the house after I bought it. He said nothing then. Your mother and I have sacrificed a lot for this family. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. That sentence wasn't about the locksmith. It wasn't about Daniel. It was about permission. My parents believed sacrifice gave them ownership. I asked, Is Daniel moving in? My father didn't answer. I didn't need him to. I ended the call. That evening, I went through the house again. This time I looked at everything differently. The hallway closet had Daniel's jackets. The downstairs bathroom had a new electric razor. There were men's shoes beside the back door. A bottle of his cologne sat on the bathroom shelf. I had missed all of it because I had been looking for something dramatic. The evidence wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. That was what made it frightening. Daniel wasn't preparing to move in. He had already moved in. I went upstairs. My bedroom door was closed. I opened it. Nothing seemed wrong. Then I noticed my filing cabinet. The top drawer was open. I always locked it. I walked over. My mortgage papers were inside. So were my property tax records. My insurance documents and a copy of the deed. The drawer had been opened. I checked the papers. Nothing was missing, but one folder was slightly crooked. I pulled it out. The folder contained a copy of the deed I had requested 2 years earlier. On the first page, someone had written in pencil, Family property. I stared at those words for a long time. I knew my father's handwriting. That was his. I took a photograph. Then I locked the drawer. For the first time, I considered calling the police. I didn't. Not yet, because I still had a question I couldn't answer. Why would they do this? If my parents wanted Daniel to live with me, why not simply ask? Why change the locks? Why make 6 keys? Why disconnect my cameras? Why open my documents? Why pretend my father owned the house? There had to be a reason. The next thing I checked was Daniel. I searched his social media. Nothing. Then I remembered an old friend of his, Marcus. Marcus and Daniel had been close since college. I called him. He answered. Hey, everything okay? I need to ask you something about Daniel. There was a pause. Sure. Is he having money problems? Another pause. Then why? Because he's moving into my house. Marcus went silent. I said, you knew. No. You sound like you knew. I knew he was looking for somewhere. Why? Marcus sighed. He lost his apartment. How? He stopped paying rent. That wasn't enough. Why? His business went under. I closed my eyes. Daniel had started a small contracting company 2 years earlier. My parents had been proud of him. He had posted pictures of trucks, equipment, job sites. Then, suddenly, nothing. I asked Marcus. How bad is it? Pretty bad. Debt? Yes. How much? I don't know. I thanked him. Then I searched Daniel's business records. The company had several outstanding claims. One was from a supplier. Another was from a former employee. Then I found something worse. A notice connected to a lender. Daniel had personally guaranteed one of the loans that if he couldn't pay, they could pursue him personally. I sat at my desk. Now I understood why he needed a place to stay. I didn't understand why my house. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I replied. What does that mean? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then. Talk to your father. I called immediately. He didn't answer. I called my mother. She didn't answer either. I went downstairs. My parents were gone. Daniel's boxes were still there. I looked at them differently now. Not as luggage. A warning. The next thing I did was something I wish I had done much earlier. I checked the property records. The deed was still entirely in my name. No transfer. No lien. No ownership change. Nothing. Legally, nothing had happened. But when I checked the county's online property portal, I noticed an alert. Someone had recently requested a copy of the property record. The requester's name was my father. I printed it. Then I found another request. Daniel. 2 days before the locksmith. That changed everything. They weren't simply moving Daniel into my house. They had been researching my property. I wrote another list at what I now knew. Daniel was financially in trouble. He had lost his apartment. He had emptied his storage unit. My parents had arranged access to my house. My father had represented himself as the homeowner. Both my father and Daniel had requested my property records. What I still didn't know, what they intended to do with the house. I wasn't willing to wait anymore. The next morning, I called an attorney. Her name was Elaine Mercer. She was recommended by a co-worker who had used her for a property dispute. I brought everything: the locksmith receipt, the camera screenshots, the property records, the photographs of Daniel's belongings, the document with family property written across it. Elaine went through the papers without interrupting. When she finished, she looked at me. Do you have a mortgage? Yes. Who's paying it? I am. Taxes? Me. Insurance? Me. Utilities? Me. Any written agreement allowing your parents to live there? No. Any agreement allowing your brother to live there? No. She nodded. Then don't make this an emotional argument. What should I make it? A property issue. I asked. What are they trying to do? She looked at the locksmith receipt again. I can't tell you what they're planning. Can you tell me what they're not doing? Sure. She pointed to the receipt. They're not behaving like guests. That sentence stayed with me. Elaine advised me to change the locks immediately, not secretly, properly. She also told me to document everything. Then she said something else. Don't threaten them. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because if they believe you're bluffing, they'll push harder. I asked, what if they say it's a family home? She looked directly at me. Family is a relationship. It isn't a deed. I went home, and I changed the locks, every exterior door. The locksmith gave me 4 keys. Point 1 for me, point 1 spare, point 2 for emergency use. I installed a new camera system too. Then I sat at my kitchen table and waited at AT 7:42 that evening. My father arrived. He tried his KEY.IT didn't work. I watched through the camera. He tried again. Then he looked directly at the camera. My phone rang. I answered. What did you do? I changed my locks. You had no right. I almost laughed. To change the locks on my house. You've embarrassed us. I didn't do anything to you. You changed the locks on your mother. No. I changed them after you made 6 copies without asking me. He was silent. Then he said, "Open the door." "No. Daniel has nowhere to go. That's not my responsibility. He is your brother." "I know. You would put your own brother on the street." I looked through the glass. Daniel was sitting in my father's car. He wasn't looking at me. That I asked. "Why didn't he ask me?" My father didn't answer. "Why didn't either of you ask me?" Still nothing. Then my mother got out of the car. She walked toward the door. She didn't yell. That made it worse. She looked through the glass. "You've changed." I said, "Maybe." She shook her head. "Your house was always supposed to be the place where everyone could come home. It still is. Then let us in." "Not like this." She stared at me. Then she said, "You don't understand what we've already done." The words hit me harder than I expected. Did I unlock the door but kept the chain on? "What have you done?" She looked at my father. He looked away. That was when I knew there was something else. That I asked again. "What have you done?" My mother said, "We made arrangements." "What arrangements?" She started crying, not dramatically, quietly. "I'm sorry." My stomach dropped. "For what?" She couldn't answer. My father finally spoke. "We used the house as collateral." Everything went silent. I opened the door. "What?" He said it again. "We used the house as collateral." My mind immediately went to the deed. "The house is in my name." "We know." "Then how?" My father looked exhausted. "Daniel needed a loan." I stared at him. "How did you use my house?" "We didn't sell it." "That isn't what I asked." "We gave the lender documents." "What documents?" He didn't answer. My mother did. "Copies of the deed." I felt cold. "Without my signature." My father said, "It wasn't finalized." "Then why did you do it?" "Because Daniel needed help." I stepped backward. The room seemed suddenly too small. They had not just moved my brother into my home. They had tried to turn my home into a safety net for his debt. I asked, "How much?" My father looked at the floor. "How much?" $180,000. I couldn't speak. Daniel's debt wasn't a few unpaid bills. It was enough to threaten everything I had spent years building. I asked, "Does Daniel know?" My mother said nothing. That answer was enough. I looked at the car. Daniel was still sitting inside. I opened the door. "Daniel." He got out. He looked at me. For the first time in months, my brother looked genuinely ashamed. "I didn't know they'd use the house." "You knew they were moving you in?" "Yes." "You knew about the locks?" He looked away. "Yes." "You knew about the property records?" He swallowed. "Yes." I asked, "Did you know about the loan?" He said nothing. My father answered for him. "Daniel knew." I looked at my brother. "Did you?" Finally he nodded. "Yes." That was the moment something inside me broke. Not because he needed help, because he had decided I was safer to exploit than to ask. I said, "Go home." He gave a bitter laugh. "I don't have one." "You did." "Not anymore." "Then find somewhere else." My mother stepped forward. "Please." I shook my head. "No." The word felt strange coming out of my mouth, but it also felt right. I closed the door. Then I called Elaine. She answered immediately. "They admitted it," I said. "Admitted what?" "The loan." There was a pause. "Do you have proof?" "I have them on my security recording." Another pause. "Good. Don't delete anything." The next 48 hours were the hardest of my life. I learned things I wish I had never known. My father had contacted a private lender after Daniel's bank rejected him. They had given the lender copies of my deed and tax records. The lender believed my father had authority to offer the property as security. No money had been officially secured against the house because my signature was required to complete the transaction. But the attempt itself was real. So were the documents. And so was the money Daniel had already received from my parents. It turned out they had drained most of their retirement savings trying to keep his business alive. Daniel had hidden the extent of his debts. My parents had hidden the extent of what they had done. Everyone had been protecting everyone, except me. That was the part one couldn't stop thinking about. I had spent years believing my family was imperfect but loyal. Now I realized loyalty had become selective. They protected Daniel from consequences by transferring the consequences to me. The next thing I checked was the storage unit paperwork. There was a document among Daniel's boxes that listed the contents of his old apartment. The bottom was a handwritten note. "Move everything to family house before Friday." I recognized my mother's handwriting. Friday was 2 days away. They had planned the move before I knew anything. Then I found another document and a letter from Daniel's former landlord. His apartment lease had been terminated. He had 30 days to leave. The date was 6 weeks earlier. My parents had known for more than a month. They had deliberately waited until the last moment to tell me that I sat on the garage floor surrounded by my brother's possessions, that I was angry. But underneath the anger was something worse, grief, because suddenly I was mourning people who were still alive, the parents I thought I had, the brother I thought would ask for help before taking it, the family home I thought existed in the emotional sense, even if the legal sense was mine, that I didn't want revenge, that I wanted the truth, and now I had most of it, except for one question. Why had my father written family property on my deed? That detail kept bothering me. That it was too personal, too deliberate. That I called him. He answered. I said, "Why did you write that?" Silence. "On my deed." He knew exactly what I meant. Finally he said, "Because I thought you would eventually understand." Understand what? That what you built doesn't only belong to you. I closed my eyes. That's where you're wrong. He sighed. Your mother and I spent our lives building this family. And I appreciate that. Then why can't you help your brother? I would have. You didn't. You never asked. We knew you'd say no. That sentence stopped me. Why? Because you've always been different. I waited. He continued. You worked for everything. You don't like owing people. You don't like depending on anyone. And Daniel isn't like that. I laughed quietly. So because you knew I'd say no, you decided not to ask. He didn't answer. I said, "You didn't want my help. You wanted my house." His silence confirmed it. That was the final piece. The next thing I did was file the necessary paperwork with Elaine's help to make sure no unauthorized transaction could proceed. Then I sent my parents a written notice that they could no longer stay at the property, that I gave them time to collect their belongings, that I did the same for Daniel, no shouting, no public humiliation, no revenge post on social media. Just a boundary. They had crossed mine. I was going to enforce it the first day they came to collect their things. My mother walked slowly through the house. She touched the kitchen cabinets, the picture frames, the living room lamp. She looked like she was visiting a museum. "I love this place," she said. "I know. I thought we all had a place here." "You did." She looked at me. "Until now." I shook my head. "No. Until you tried to take it." She looked down. "I didn't think you'd really make us leave. I didn't think you'd really try to take it." Neither of us said anything after that. My father came in carrying boxes. He looked older. Daniel stayed outside. When he finally entered, he stopped in the hallway. "I owe you an apology." I said nothing. He continued. "I should have asked." "Yes. I thought you'd say no. You didn't give me the chance." "I know." He looked around. I was scared. I believed him. That was the hardest part. That he wasn't a cartoon villain. That he was my brother. That he had made terrible choices because he was afraid. That my parents had made terrible choices because they loved him. And I had been the easiest person in the family to sacrifice because everyone assumed I would survive. That I told him, "Being afraid doesn't make what you did okay." "I know. Do you?" He nodded. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I'm glad you changed the locks." I looked at him. He said, "Because if you hadn't, I probably would have kept pretending this was normal." That was the closest thing to honesty I'd heard from him in months. He took his boxes. Then he left. The house was finally quiet. For the first time in almost a year, I could hear the refrigerator humming from the other room. No voices, no footsteps, no television downstairs. Just silence. That I thought I would feel victorious. That I didn't. I felt empty. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had found the locksmith receipt. That I looked at the empty chair where my mother used to sit. Then I noticed something. That a tiny scratch in the wood. That I remembered making that scratch the week I bought the table. That I had been assembling it alone. That I had dropped one of the metal legs. That my father had laughed and told me I'd never built furniture correctly. That I smiled despite myself. That was the strange thing about family. The bad memories didn't erase the good ones. The good ones didn't excuse the bad ones either. Both could exist. That I finally understood that. A few months later, Daniel found work with another contractor. That he sold his truck, paid down part of his debt. That he rented a small apartment. That he didn't ask to come back. My parents moved into a smaller place. That my father called occasionally. That my mother called more often. For a while, I didn't answer. Eventually, I did, and we talked about ordinary things. Weather. Work. My mother's garden. My father's need. We didn't talk about the house. Not at first. Then one evening my mother said, "I miss having everyone together." I told her, "So do I." She started crying. I did too. But neither of us apologized for the boundary, because the boundary was necessary. The strange thing is that taking my house back didn't mean I stopped loving my family. It meant I stopped confusing love with permission. A year after the locksmith receipt, I replaced the front door, not because the old one was damaged, because I wanted something new. I stood outside with the contractor while he measured the frame. He asked what kind of lock I wanted. I looked at the house. Then I said, "One with a key only I control." He laughed. I didn't. That evening, I went inside and opened the kitchen drawer. I still had the locksmith receipt. I had kept it. Not because I wanted to remember the betrayal, because I wanted to remember the moment I started paying attention. For months, I had believed the house was the problem. It wasn't. The house had never changed. The people around it had. And the truth was much simpler than I wanted it to be. That a family home isn't created by someone claiming it belongs to everyone. It becomes a family home when everyone respects the person who owns it, the person who lives there, and the boundaries that make the place safe. My parents thought they were protecting their family. Daniel thought he was accepting help. I thought I was being selfish by saying no. None of us understood the difference between helping someone and rescuing them from consequences. I do now. Sometimes love means opening your door. Sometimes love means offering a couch for a few weeks. Sometimes love means helping someone find a job, sell a truck, negotiate a payment plan, or start over. And sometimes love means standing at your own front door and saying no. You cannot come in like this. I still have the receipt. The one for 6 keys. It sits inside the same folder as my deed now. The deed says my name. The receipt reminds me why that mattered. If you found that receipt in your own house, would you have confronted your family immediately? Or would you have done what I did and started looking for the answer first? I still don't know which choice was braver. I only know that the investigation gave me something confrontation never could, proof. And once I had the proof, I couldn't keep pretending that my parents had called my house a family home. They were right about one thing, that it was a home, but they were wrong about who got to decide what happened inside it. I took it back, not because I stopped loving them, because I finally understood that loving my family did not require giving them ownership of my life.